You know, one of my dear friends is Craig Shirley. You've heard me talk about Craig before. He is the expert historian on President Ronald Reagan. I even think I'm in one of his books. But anyway, so, because I was a young Turk upstart in Pennsylvania backing Reagan. And one of the things that bothers me a great deal is when people think they have to promote another candidate, another viewpoint, and so forth by trashing Reagan. Those days are over, you know. Reagan's principles. Reagan's principles are the principles in the Constitution and the Declaration. What do you mean they're over? And so many people who say these things sound like, as I said, Marxists. You know, the world begins today when I start to think of something. And Craig Shirley's book, which just came off the presses today, it's available on Amazon.com, is The Search for Reagan, the Appealing Intellectual Conservatism of Ronald Reagan. Craig Shirley, how are you, my brother?
Mark, how are you? Good to be with you.
I'm doing great. Now let's start this way, if I may. We have a lot of people who opposed Reagan, a lot of people who would have opposed Reagan, a lot of people who never supported Reagan, running around saying they're the real Reaganites when they remind me of Gerald Ford and the Bushes and so forth and so on. What say you?
It's the same old, same old. It's a ridiculous claim. Is that you and I are old enough to remember who was really a Reaganite, and who was a foul Reaganite, and who was opposed to Reagan. Reagan ran into headwinds all through his presidential, all through his years and all through his presidency, even from his own party. Until he left office, and he left office with a 73% approval rating. By then, he had convinced, obviously, a majority of Americans, a majority of Republicans, and a sizable number of Democrats that his policies were the right prescription for America.
Now, some of these people who claim to be the real Reagans would include all the non-Reagans. In other words, our friend Karl Rove. It would include Larry Hogan, Chris Christie, who has a failing book out as I speak, and others of that ilk. In other words, the Republican establishment. How did Reagan have to deal with the Republican establishment?
He ran through them. He ran around them. He was more intellectual than them. That's part of the reason for the book. I mean, he was able to make a more compelling case for his view of the world, his view of humans, and his view of privacy. All the things that we as conservatives cherish: freedom, privacy, dignity, the ability of the individual to come and go as he or she pleases. All those things that we cherish, he was able to articulate much better than I'm doing, and convince. All he needed really was a microphone and an audience, and he could convince them of the righteousness of his ideas.
You know, one of the things you talk about, the book covers everything. It's a fantastic book. I want to congratulate you. I know how much
Thank you for writing
time
the poem.
and effort.
I really am touched. Really touched, Mark.
Well, it's my honor. Brilliant, wasn't it? No, just kidding. I wrote the foreword, folks.
Brilliant. It was brilliant.
The book is damn good. It's very, very good. If you really want to understand what's going on as it applies today, which is what you do here. Do you think Ronald Reagan would be a big fan of Putin right about now?
No. Anybody who squashes the individual in the name of the collective, anybody who is corrupt, anybody who, it doesn't matter whether they're in America and it's Joe Biden, or whether they're in Russia and it's Vladimir Putin, he would oppose them. He would oppose, anybody who steals 1 second of freedom away from individual. If you go back and look at his speeches when he was president, how many times does he make reference to the individual? Sidney Hooks wrote some years ago a book called The Hero in History. And in that book, he talked about the event-making man. And who can you think of anybody more qualified for that phrase than Ronald Reagan? He was the event-making man. He changed our view of the world. He did so much, in terms of the economy, but also foreign policy, also in terms of defeating the Soviet Union, and inspired so many things. It's very few of these men come along. Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, people like that. But they don't grow on trees.
And look at what's going on in Congress today, including with the Republicans. You have Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell was never a Reagan guy, was he?
No. He was for Gerald Ford in '76.
Mm-hmm. And he worked in the Ford administration.
Yes, he did, and he was also the county executive there in Louisville, and goes back, then to then. He was a Ford guy.
What about Karl Rove?
He would never understand. Yeah. He was a Bush guy. He was a Bush guy through and through. Back in longer than you and I like to remember sometimes, but back in the 70s and 80s, is that Reaganites couldn't get in the front door of the Republican National Committee because they wanted to populate it with Bushies. They wanted to populate it with people like Karl Rove.
It's nothing against Karl Rove. He is what he is. He was what he was. But that's pretty much the part of the Republican Party that he promotes and is paid by, which is the establishment Republicans. Nothing wrong with that as long as you're, as long as that's understood. Yeah, exactly.
There's two different universes that exist that occupy not the same space but similar space. One is conservatism, American conservatism. You're American conservative, I'm American conservative. We believe in certain things, certain principles that Buckley and Von Mises and Friedman and Reagan and other people espoused. Is that then there's republicanism, which sometimes overlaps with American conservatism and sometimes doesn't. American conservatism is fixed. It's like granite. It's rooted in the Constitution. It's rooted in the Declaration. It's about individuality. But republicanism will shift with the times. I remember when Republicans used to be for free trade, and then before that for high tariffs. Now they're back for restrictive, tariffs. I remember when the Republican Party used to be for high taxes. In 1970, as an example, Ted Kennedy, who was then a United States Senator, and Walter Mondale, another United States Senator, said to stimulate the economy, we need to enact huge tax cuts for the American people. And the Nixon administration said, no, we need to prime the pump with massive federal spending to get the economy moving. I mean, that was the position of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But the conservatism is fixed. Republicans will shift with the winds. But conservatism is fixed, is a fixed point in the sky.
Are you concerned, as I am, particularly given Reagan's incredible success in foreign policy and national security, destroyed the Soviet Union and so many others on the left that were threatening our country? Are you concerned that some of these isolationists who claim to be America First sound a lot like George McGovern or Bernie Sanders or even Tlaib when it comes to Israel or even when it comes to Ukraine? Don't they sound strange?
They sound strange, and they sound, quite frankly, un-American. Is that Israel has always been America's friend. Israel is our best friend in the Middle East. Israel is a stable country in the Middle East, unlike the countries around it. And why they have to go on questioning this is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Now, Reagan really never cared for Biden, did he? Because Biden was even known back then as not only a dingbat, but a nasty SOB, wasn't he?
Yeah, he wrote in his diary. Bingo, that's good. Reagan wrote in his diaries of his disdain for, in his own inimitable way, but he wrote about Biden in his diaries, not warmly.
Mm-hmm. Well, who could?
And of course, Lowell Weicker, he trashed in his diaries. Lowell Weicker, you remember Lowell Weicker? He was a liberal Republican senator from Connecticut, and Reagan called him a schmuck and a no-good fathead in his diaries.
He could have done radio. Oh, wait a minute, he did. Now you have many fantastic chapters here. For instance, most people have never heard of Schweiker, the former senator from Pennsylvania. It's funny because I fought hard for Reagan. Yeah, but in 1976, when he picked him, he was a big Union left-wing Republican. And so he
was pro-life.
But let me just make the point. So he picked Schweiker. He thought he would get the Pennsylvania delegates, and the opposite happened. They said, no, we want nothing to do with Schweiker. Isn't that true, the process?
Well, John Sears, who was then Reagan's manager, learned that a month before the convention that CBS News, which was highly regarded in those days, was working on a story. Remember the nomination process was a real tussle between the two, and it was still undecided a month before the convention. And John learned that CBS political unit was working on a story doing a meticulous count of all the delegates that would say that Gerald Ford had won the nomination, and this is a month out. And if that happened, they'd go on national news with it, and it would be reported by all the media, and Reagan's campaign would be dead. John did it to buy time. He did it to throw confusion into the air to get to the convention and hopefully get Reagan the nomination at the convention. It didn't work. The second part didn't work, but the first part actually worked to keep everybody guessing for one more month. But Schweiker, became a good friend of mine, and
he became very solid.
Very good. He became very solid. Good. He ran Reagan's cabinet. It became a solid conservative.
And he really did. Now, I want to keep you over the break, obviously, but you talk about Reagan and intellectual conservatism. And because of the smear job the media, the Republican establishment, the Bushies, frankly, and others did on Reagan, you were supposed to believe that Reagan was sort of a useful idiot and so forth and so on, and yet he had really fantastic, very, substantive books in his library that he had actually read and so forth and so on. So I want to explore this with you. Reagan, the intellectual, who was incredible reader and well-informed on history and principles and philosophy, versus Reagan, the dunce who would get us into a war and on and on. And then I want to ask you this, even though their personalities are completely different, don't they pull that stuff out with every Republican? They did it to Goldwater. They're doing it to Trump right now. And did they also accuse Reagan of potentially being dictatorial and issues of that sort? What do you think?
They pull out that old chestnut. Every 4 years they pull out those chestnuts.
Mm-hmm. And in Reagan's case, you had a lot of access to a lot of information. What kind of books did he read?
Oh, he read everything under the sun. Not just Louis L'Amour. He loved Louis L'Amour's cowboy novels, but he read von Mises. He read Witness. He read Free to Choose. He read The Road to Serfdom. He read all sorts of intellectual books of conservatism. He read Buckley avidly. He read the National Review every 2 weeks. He read Human Events. He was an avid reader, but also he was an avid writer. That's one thing that's really overlooked. He was a terrific writer. He probably generated more letters as president than any other president in American history.
It's very important. It's very important, folks, to understand Reagan so you understand what's going on today. He was the greatest Republican vote getter in history, in my view, the third greatest president in history. We'll be right back. Fantastic book with Craig Shirley, The Search for Reagan. It's very relevant to today. You can get it on Amazon.com. It's on my social sites. And we're also going to have Craig on this week on Life, Liberty, and Levin.